Today, we become legends.
Today's Titan Talk revealed the next two gods coming to Smite 2 and some teasers for them, as well as Non-Conquest balance making a return to the franchise, and some discussions on the new items and their balance, as well as the lighting overhaul, movement speed and CCR as stats, and a whole lot more. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to catch my future recaps, but without further ado, let's jump in. So first up, let's talk about those god reveals, with the next two gods coming to Smite 2 over the next month. First up is Yman Gander, who will be filling the Guardian/support slot. For those unaware, the team are generally following a mantra of doing one god for each conquest role in a cycle before repeating, with this cycle starting at Wukong for solo lane, then we had Hu Yi recently for ADC, Giannis is coming soon as mid, which leaves the next two as support and jungle. After these two, they will repeat the cycle of one more god for each role, and so on, though not necessarily in the same order of roles as this time. So Yman Gander is filling the support/guardian slot this time around, and they did tease some of his gameplay features and +1s on the show. For those unaware, Yman will be coming before the assassin/jungler, which we'll talk about in a second. They didn't give explicit details on his changes, we'll get more of those in a couple of weeks when they reveal him fully, but Clumsy did say that he will build up poison on enemies via his pulls and basic attacks that can be consumed for extra damage. They also mentioned that Yman will be hybrid scaling, using both strength and intelligence in his kit. They said he'll use intelligence pretty much the way he always did magical power in Smite 1, and the strength side will be on his 2, 3, and ultimate, as well as the new poison mechanic they mentioned will tie into strength scaling in some way. For those who played a lot of Yman in Smite 1, you'll absolutely know that he was viable in both support and solo lane, but to make sure support players have something exciting to play with, since Yman is taking up the support slot in this roster rotation, he will be getting an aspect aimed more at support Yman, that takes away some of his damage and grants more utility and ally buffs. Of course, you can probably expect base Yman to be support viable anyway, as more of an aggressive frontline support, but this aspect will probably give him a more defensive and true support gameplay style by the sounds of it, which should be cool. As mentioned before, Yman will be fully revealed 2 weeks on Wednesday and released 3 weeks on Tuesday. Moving on from Yman though, next up we have the new jungler/assassin who will be coming after the World Serpent, and that will be Suku Yomi, which was a surprise even to me. We hadn't seen anything about Suku even through data mining up until this point, and everyone was expecting it to be Ratatoska, and Kilgun did say that he hears the Rat enjoyers, and Suku and Rat are roughly equal in terms of popularity, but Suku just fit their schedule better at the moment, so not all hope is lost for Rat release sometime soon. But yeah, Suku Yomi will be coming to the game after Yman. Because he's less far along in development, there were less teasers for Suku, but Kilgun did say that he will be hybrid scaling and most likely leaning into the Shingetsu and Mangetsu elements, with each weapon being more focused on one particular scaling type, a bit like Mordred with Clarent and Morning. I think hybrid scaling makes a lot of sense for Suku in that regard, and just in general, as I think his gameplay will fit quite well with some potential intelligence scaling. They also said they're not completely locked down on what his aspect will be just yet, but currently they're leaning towards exploring the ranged auto attacks area of his design, so potentially an ADC style aspect, or maybe a more full-on ranged ability based assassin style where he plays almost like Ula. And finally for Suku, Kilgun mentioned that Pawn, the designer working on Suku's port, is also looking at making his 2 tie into his kit a little better, as Smite 1 Suku 2 is a cool ability but feels like it doesn't belong in his kit necessarily, so they're looking at adding some more like duality elements with his 2 weapons maybe, somewhat similar to how his 1 and 3 use each weapon. But that's Suku Yomi who's coming after Giannis and Yman Gander. He'll be revealed 4 weeks on Wednesday and releases 5 weeks on Tuesday. If you want to chat about these reveals or anything else discussed on today's show, I'm live on both Twitch and YouTube streaming some Smite 2 ranked as this video goes out, so you can come say hi. One final small thing before we get into the Q&A section of today's show though, which had some pretty interesting questions in my opinion. Clumsy did mention that he's working on adding non-conquest balance for Akate's aspect specifically, which has been a big problem in non-conquest modes basically since its release, especially Assault. But because it's not very good in Conquest, they don't want to just outright nerf it. This of course opens up the door for more potential non-conquest balance changes down the line, which is good to see in my opinion. I always like this idea in Smite 1, as I personally feel like the game should be balanced around Conquest as the primary concern, but that can lead to some outlier cases where a god or item is terrible in Conquest and thus never receives any nerfs but is completely OP in casual modes, and this lets them remedy that. Clumsy said he's not sure if it will make it into the game for OB16, but he's currently working on it. Moving into Q&A for today's show though, first up, somebody asked if Giannis will be shipping with an aspect, and Kilgun said he probably won't, as they need a bit more time to cook on the ideas they have for his aspect and don't want to release it half-baked. There were some more questions in chat about the general lack of goddesses in recent months, and Kilgun said that generally there will be more male gods than female ones, just due to there being more male gods in mythology, and the male gods tend to be more recognizable and popular, but they are aware of the community's hankering for some female ports, and he said there will be, quote, quite a few female gods coming in the rest of the lineup for this year. year, of which we have probably around 7 left after Suku Yomi's release, assuming the team takes a Christmas break like they usually do and skips one patch. Someone asked if the lighting overhaul is making any progress, and Kilgun said it almost certainly won't be an OB16, but possibly OB17, and if not, then probably OB18, which is exciting. Lighting is definitely one of the areas that the game can improve the most visually right now, and it has a huge impact on every area of the visuals as opposed to just like updating some textures or adding some trinkets here and there. Kilgun said it won't make the game look entirely different or anything, but it definitely looks better based on what he's seen in its current state. Someone asked why they don't release skins every week instead of all on patch day, and Kilgun said they have generally found that skins sell better when they're released on patch day, and some players can miss that they're even available if they're released later in the patch cycle. There were some questions on the balance of the new patch and how the team feels about it, and Clumsy said that after the hotfixes, they feel like the game is in a fairly healthy state, and they're happy to see that tanks are doing better than they were before, but they are of course keeping an eye on sub-specific gods and items to make sure they're not too oppressive. Hercules and Bacchus were mentioned specifically, as well as Sanguine Lash, Mystical Mail, and Contagion in regards to tank damage output. Someone followed up a bit later in the show asking if it's fair to say we've gone from a must-build anti-heal to a must-build new items meta, and Clumsy said that generally it will feel like that more than the actual balance of the game would suggest, because right now everyone wants to try out the new things, and with so many new things that can interact with so many gods in unique ways, there's going to be a lot of those floating around as people try them out. But they are of course aware that some of the new items are really strong, and they're keeping a close eye on them for balance reasons, which we'll probably get to see more of in the OB16 balance notes, which they said will probably be shown either on Friday or Monday next week at the latest. On a similar note, someone asked if they will consider bringing back movement speed as a stat on items, and Clumsy said it's something they are potentially open to doing, and they hear the complaints about Mercury specifically, but they have to be very careful with movement speed as it's probably one of the most powerful stats in the entire game, and you can fairly quickly result in a meta where movement speed is king, and any god or item with access to it just becomes the only way to play the game, because being faster than your enemy is so powerful. Someone asked later on about CCR in a similar vein, and Clumsy said CCR is sort of like movement speed but less extreme in that it's just a very good passive stat that just does work for you in the background and goes underrated sometimes. So they probably wouldn't straight up add it to any existing items as they might just become OP, but it's something they have considered adding as a stat in the past and might do in the future, potentially with some new items. On the topic of items, someone asked for an attack speed and lifesteal item similar to RC and Smite 1, and Clumsy said they are open to filling gaps in stat combinations that don't currently exist in the store, but they want to make sure they have a good idea and niche to fill when they do it, rather than just creating items purely to fill a certain stat pair, as there is also an argument that you can just build a heavy attack speed item and a heavy lifesteal item to get similar results, and I imagine they want to stay away from what happened in Smite 1, where so many items had every single stat you could possibly want in a specific role. Someone asked about backdooring and split pushing, and Clumsy said he agrees that when it's too strong, split push and backdoor strategies can be very unengaging, but he does feel like having it be viable is an important aspect for the game that players should have to play around, and it's always in flux on how viable it is. There was a question on when the agility relic will come to ranked, and Clumsy said they're currently still feeling it out and implementing fixes and improvements to it, so probably not next patch, but they're feeling it out and seeing how strong it feels before implementing it into ranked. Someone asked why Suku Yomi was chosen for this cycle of releases, and Kilgun said that generally he just fit into the calendar really well in terms of which departments would have to do the most or least work on his port, and he's a bit simpler compared to Yman Gander, whereas a more complex assassin like Rat would have meant two quite hard to make releases back to back, which didn't seem like the right move for them at this time. There was a question on how the team feels about Rodder Tahuti in the realm of a must-buy item similar to anti-heal and boots that they have since removed, and they said that generally they feel like Tahuti is a little different in that there are some cases where you might not want to buy it, not very many in truth, but there are some, and they also feel like it's fun to play around its power spike. Like when you get Rod, you start hitting so much harder than before, and that's a fun element to play with, whereas something like boots or anti-heal were never really fun or exciting to buy. You just had to buy them. You never really wanted to buy them or had any fun doing it. And finally, someone asked if we could get more clarity on the numbers in god ability descriptions, such as the number of times things hit, and Kilgun said he is currently going through all the items in the game to try and clear up things like that and make them easier to read and understand. So if that goes over well, he might look at doing a similar thing for god abilities. But that's everything discussed on today's Titan Talk. Don't forget to drop a like before you leave, and I'll catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.